Crisis Radio. Interesting developments in the gatekeeper community here. There has been some kind of a falling out between Matt Taibbi and Pierre Omidyar. This is sort of in the, what can we say, the Snowden and cottage industry, various spin-offs of this. Taibbi, much overrated, right? It's nice to coin phrases, right? It's very nice literary exercise to come up with purple passages or zingers, right? Goldman Sachs, a vampire squid on the face of humanity. The problem with this is, what do you propose to do? What is your fighting perspective? What's your organizing? Where's your class orientation? And don't hold your breath on that. Remember that Taibbi essentially established himself as respectable by viciously attacking anybody who did not believe the entirety of the absurd U.S. official story of 9/11. And then we've got the new documentary, Citizen 4. The gatekeepers have created a mutual admiration society, right? They sit around and tell each other how great they are through these documentaries. So be it Amy Goodman, Jeremy Scahill, people like this, and above all Snowden, and I suppose Assange might get something if he's still considered part of the cartel. But you see how pointless this is. When we come to economics, couple of interesting landmarks this week. One which is not economic is that the Afghan war has just ended, and that's a problem, right? The military industrial boys feel that they've got to keep something going. So the Afghan war is over. Will there be some kind of a crude provocation to find some substitute conflict? And this, unfortunately, this sounds unbelievably schematic, but this is how they think, how they operate. The other thing that has ended, and you'll see the same idea, quantitative easing 3 has come to an end as of this week. The Federal Reserve now says that their support operations for toxic, bankrupt, kited derivatives, especially collateralized debt obligations, mortgage-backed securities, as they're called, right? They bought up several $1 trillion worth of this, right? They've spent $3 to $4 trillion on support operations for rotten derivatives. Those have gone on the Fed balance sheet. That could have actually given you a pretty fair recovery, right? We'd like to have $5 trillion, but $3 or $4 trillion will also get you something. But no, that had to go to the zombie banks for toxic derivatives. Since the QE3 has ended, I think they're pretty well aware that if they don't come up with some substitute method of pumping liquidity in, the whole thing might sort of implode. And the idea is that Japan, as previously back in the 80s and 90s, you'll remember that Japan was the liquidity pump for the entire world system in the 80s and into the 90s until it blew up. Bubble economy, you remember, right? And then, pow, it all collapsed. The goal now would be to have Japan resume the function of world liquidity pump, and I don't think that is possible. And we've also got the interesting theoretical economic question raised by Bloomberg Businessweek, and the cover story here, stimulate this. John Maynard Keynes has the last laugh on what works for the global economy, and the idea here is that austerity doesn't work. That part is okay, but that the Keynesian hot money or consumer goods recovery is the answer, and that is certainly not the case. Remember, Keynes is based on Malthus. He says so. And I mean, this time it's the part of Malthus which says, hey, capitalist producers, you are threatened by a crisis of overproduction. And in order to prevent overproduction, you need to have a class of parasites who will buy up the production. It usually means consumer goods, as we see. And this is the famous line from Malthus, A church with a capacious maw is best. In other words, a big mouth that can swallow all this stuff. That was the Church of England. Malthus was a representative of them. He was also the head of the British East India Company cadre school at Haileybury in England. And what Keynes does, essentially saying, dig a ditch and fill it up, or bury flasks with money in them and let people dig those up. That's the helicopter Ben Bernanke throwing money out of helicopters. That does not work. The recovery only comes through a revival of capital goods industries, constant, long-term, big-ticket things like locomotives, turbines, power plants, other kinds of systems, canals, locks, things like this. So it's fine to say that Keynes is better than the extreme austerity people, but it's not enough. And we have to point to the actual answer, which they don't mention here. You'll remember that there is this school which some of the British try to essentially diminish by calling them the German pre-Keynesians. Okay, the German pre-Keynesians, we know who they are. Wilhelm Lautenbach at the Friedrich List Society, September 1931, put out a couple of billion in those days, trillion today, couple of billion marks, and put that into infrastructure. In other words, things that are actually enhancing production, that increase the efficiency and the productive power of labor and streamline and improve your entire economy. That's the Lautenbach proposal and the Voitinsky-Tarnow-Bada proposal of the German unions, which is the same thing. A large multi-billion, today multi-trillion approach. In the United States, 5 trillion would be for starters on the infrastructure front. In Europe, 5, 6, 7, depending on how it goes. But you get the idea. And the purpose of that is then to modernize your superhighways, your rail systems, fast rail, maglev rail, power grids, along with the things like hospitals, 1,000 hospitals in the U.S., public buildings, libraries, all of that. And then you can get even into your science drivers, your high-energy physics, the ITER, thermonuclear fusion power. You get into your areas of aerospace. We've just seen this week here in the United States the debacle of the privatization of NASA, right? That was an orbital sciences rocket that blew up, and it was a big effort by CNN and others to cover up the fact that what had blown up was privatized. And if you want to have your postal system go the same way, you privatize it, or better yet, don't. Your school system is supposed to be privatized, according to many of these crackpot theoreticians, and so on down the line, right? Schools, postal service, Medicare, Social Security, privatize that. Well, the blowing up of that rocket is a very good metaphor for what awaits these other vital areas of life. So we are against that. But the idea is you're going to need to put some of your stimulus money coming from the nationalized Fed into refinancing student loans, into avoiding foreclosures on primary residences, but then those science driver areas, the high-energy physics, biomedical science, and a revival of the space program, not privatized in the rip-off fashion. So there it is. Keynes is not getting the last